we are going to go ahead and share the slides with you, and you can download them directly to your own desktop right now or your laptop, but we've also sent them to you in a PDF version. So please make sure that if you have the slides to go ahead and click along with us, take notes or anything else. Now also, if you are a Sourcing Interest Group member, these slides will be available, or excuse me, the actual webinar, the recorded webinar will be available to you for download and replay for 3 years on our site. So please make sure, if you like what you hear today, share it with other people in your organization. Tell them to go in. They can download on demand for 3 years. So what I'd like to do now is tell you a few of the housekeeping items. In the lower right-hand corner, click on the question mark, and that will open up your Q&A box. And if you have any trouble during today's webinar with any of the audio portion, in the upper left-hand corner of your screen, you should be able to increase the volume. So please make sure that you use those two signals. Use the question and answers to participate. We want this to be interactive. Use the volume control. But if you still have trouble with any of the volume, just send us a note, and we'll try and help you remotely as well. So with that, I'm really excited to have Denali Group with us here today. And it is Building an Effective Procurement Knowledge Management Program. Now, the two partners that are speaking today are John Evans and Don Doherty. I've known these guys for, it's almost embarrassing to say, probably getting close to 15, 20 years. John Evans is a managing partner with Denali Group. His focus areas are within Denali Consulting and Denali Intelligence service lines. In 2006, John led the startup of Denali Intelligence, which offers subscription-based, category-focused market intelligence designed specifically for the sourcing professionals. John has been consulting in the supply chain and strategic procurement space since 1989, where he began with A.T. Kearney and co-founded Denali Consulting in 1996. He's consulted with more than 100 of the Fortune 500 companies and has led more than 50 strategic sourcing programs across direct and indirect categories. He also has a bachelor's degree in industrial engineering from Georgia Tech and an MBA from Pepperdine University. Co-presenting with him today is Don Doherty, also a dear friend. He's a managing partner with Denali Group, and his focus areas are within Denali Consulting and Denali Recruiting and Staffing service lines. He has more than 17 years of supply chain management consulting experience and 8 years of industry experience, including senior positions with Co-Development International, Sabre Decision Technologies, and McDonnell Douglas. He has consulted with numerous Fortune 1000 companies in North America and Europe, and he holds a bachelor's degree in industrial engineering from Ohio State and an MBA from Pepperdine University. So John and Don, I want to welcome you to today's webinar, and I'm going to hand it over to you.
Thanks.
Thanks, Dawn, and hello, everyone. Today, both John and I are real excited to join you and share some of our thoughts about building an effective knowledge management program for your procurement organization. So to set a little context, over the past year, we at Denali embarked on basically a what's next for procurement study and engaged with VPs and CPOs from nearly 100 companies. Some of you on the call may have participated with us in various interviews or roundtables that were held, or perhaps you've even read some of our white papers that have documented the insights, trends, and predictions. But in the end, we found that the situation was really quite similar for many of the companies that shared their perspective. You know, we're coming out of a recession where we heard procurement in many cases had elevated its stature within the company and brought cost savings and cost avoidances to the table at a time when the company needed them most. But as a result, there are really now high expectations to continue bringing value, and we're trying to do that with fewer skilled resources than ever before, and it's certainly a more increasingly complex global marketplace. So to make matters even more interesting, we continue to see generational shifts in our workforce and expect many more to come into play in the near term. So one theme that resonated throughout the study was the practice of knowledge management, which is our topic for today. So for the next 55 minutes or so, John and I plan on sharing some of our thoughts, and hopefully you will take a few nuggets back to your company to help in the knowledge management efforts. But before we do that, just a quick minute around Denali Group for those of you who are not familiar with us. We are a mid-sized procurement services and advisory firm that works across numerous industries, primarily in the areas of high-tech, electric utilities, finance and insurance, manufacturing, and some telecom. We're based here in the U.S., but over the past 2 years have established a global footprint and delivery capabilities across 4 continents. We were founded back in 1996, and we do a number of things through the 4 different divisions of Denali Group, all related to procurement and supply chain. First, we have Denali Consulting, which provides consulting services primarily in the areas of sourcing, procurement transformation, category management, and general supply chain improvement. Next, we have Denali Sourcing Services, which is a new division in the last 3 years and provides on-demand sourcing execution services and procurement outsourcing to global companies. Denali Intelligence provides subscription-based and custom market intelligence that is tailored specifically for sourcing professionals. And finally, we have Denali Recruiting and Staffing, which helps procurement organizations across the country with their various recruiting efforts for both temp and permanent positions. So let's get into it. Amongst all of the ideas that were ultimately discussed with the procurement executives, it was felt that talent management will be the great differentiator for whether procurement organizations and even companies as a whole remain competitive in the future. And within that talent management environment, knowledge management is fast becoming a critical component. So here we're just highlighting a few procurement organizational trends that rose to the top when we got into the discussion of engaging the new generation of workers. First, there's a very real shift in approaches for attracting, motivating, and retaining workers, and specifically with the Gen Y workers. Everything from branding your procurement organization, developing new pay-for-performance compensation models, having a more concrete development and growth plans, and similar things like that are all going to really play an important role going forward. We're also seeing an increased use of centers of excellence, which we'll touch on a little more later. But these are internal efforts dedicated to capturing and organizing everything from process knowledge to technology know-how to market intelligence to category-specific knowledge. All information I'm sure you'll agree that procurement and sourcing professionals need at their fingertips in order to be successful. There's also certainly a trend towards more creative, experiential training approaches to help upskill our resources. And there's definitely a shift in the type of skills necessary in procurement today, mostly resulting from, the deployment of new technologies. And as more and more procurement organizations are separating strategic from tactical work, we see that more relationship management skills are becoming necessary to guide the strategic work. Some professionals are making that leap of skills development. Some have really fought it kicking and screaming and are making that change slowly, and some likely won't make the trip at all and will end up doing something else. And I'm sure you're seeing all of that type of activity happening in your organization. So on to the next slide, slide 9. Why is knowledge management more important today than ever before? It is true that while economic and even employment conditions do continue to improve, the talent management challenges are here now, and they're only predicted to get worse. We all see the stats, whether it's aging populations, decreasing birth rates, the increased life expectancy that we can all hope to have, declining tenure, and certainly a very different Y generation workforce that is motivated by varied experiences. So altogether, it will become a recruitment and retention issue if it isn't already in your company, which all in all makes it imperative for robust knowledge management programs. So on to the next slide. If these are typical comments that are made in your organization, then definitely a knowledge management program should be in your future. We always seem to reinvent the wheel when we start a new sourcing effort. Some of the others are interesting. I personally I don't know what we would do if Jane left this group. We all have people like that in our organization. If they walked out the door, years of knowledge and insight would walk out as well. So all good reasons that a knowledge management imperative should be on your radar screen. So let's jump to our first polling question. We'd really be interested in knowing, where you guys are on a continuum. So if you would, we're going to take a few minutes. How would you describe your organization's approach to knowledge management? A, do you have no program in place? B, some knowledge management activities, but mostly focused on training and personal development. C, we're just beginning to develop a more holistic knowledge management program. Or D, we have a robust knowledge management program in place today. So if you would, just take a few minutes, and we'll come back and review the results.
So folks, on the right-hand side of your screen is the polling question. If you go ahead and click and hit submit, we'll calculate the results in just a minute. We have Don, I'm sort of blown away by the number of people that are both registered and here today. So this must be a very hot topic. But I'm also still reeling over the fact that Generation Y is going to have 25 jobs in their lifetime. Doesn't that it seems impossible that they would change jobs that quickly?
Well, it certainly is seen as something we're all going to have to deal with and almost build into our strategies, that the Generation Y workforce is very interested in moving around and having a broad range of experiences. So a lot of companies are engaging that and expecting that some of those employees will only stay around for maybe 2 or 3 years, and we have to kind of build our programs around that.
Oh, absolutely. It shows the importance of this. So I have a question that came in from someone. They said, how does Denali define talent management? So you mentioned it earlier on. What is talent management?
Yep. Good question. Well, I'm sure there are many different definitions, but we like to look at it really from a holistic approach to the employment life cycle. Everything from having a talent strategy that you closely align to your organization's goals, having a rigorous approach to attracting and recruiting the right people, having a robust performance management process, incorporating both employee and an organizational mentoring, development and training programs, having the right compensation program in place to properly motivate the people, and then even finally having well thought out succession plans in place. So it incorporates a lot of different elements that we see companies have not necessarily thought through in their entirety.
Mm-hmm. So the results are posted there. Don, can you comment? Is this what you expected?
Yeah, it looks like 42% have said some knowledge management activities are in place, but mostly focused in training and personal development. The next highest one, 29%, were just beginning to develop a holistic knowledge management program. The lowest response was we have a robust knowledge management program in place. So these are pretty much how we expected. We thought that anywhere in that B and C answer where they've got some activity going on, but it may not be completely holistic yet. So it pretty much comes through as we expected.
Well, good.
Okay, I think we're gonna move on to the next section, and I'm going to hand it over to John Evans here.
Thank you.
Thanks, Don. Excuse me. Thanks for joining us. I'm going to talk a little bit about Denali's view on what knowledge management really is. And for those of you who are following on the PDF version, we're on slide 12. So, a lot of people, as we saw in the last slide, or in the polling question, think of knowledge management really as just training and development. And from our perspective, knowledge management is a lot more than that. There's 4 key elements from our perspective in terms of what knowledge management really is, and some of the things that you really need to put in place to have an effective knowledge management program. And we'll go through each of these 4 elements over the following slides. So the first piece with knowledge management is really process knowledge. So it's all about documenting what key processes you're using in your procurement organization, and they're typically things like strategic sourcing, category management, category strategy, supplier relationship management, contract management. So whatever process is important to your organization, it's important to document those processes and have the right templates and job aids and examples and tools that can help you standardize that. It's all about how do we standardize this? So if we do have people coming and going over the next, in the next generation of workforce, where we've got 2 or 3 years as the expected duration, if we do have that, how do we ensure that every new person that comes into the department really is using the same process? So it's really, really important, we feel, to have standardized process knowledge as part of a knowledge management program. The second major piece is technology knowledge. Especially, I would say, in the last 10 years, Technology has become much more sophisticated. It's become much more prevalent in a procurement organization. It used to be that companies just had a purchase order technology and that was it. Now, and we'll talk about this in a later slide, but there's so much technology that procurement organizations are using these days. And again, with higher levels of turnover, you're going to have people coming in that not only are you expecting them to get to know your industry and your categories, your spend, they're also going to have to potentially learn a lot of new technology tools to use. And so it's important as part of knowledge management to have some type of formal program to train people and get people up to speed on your technologies. Third piece, as we talked about earlier, is training and skills development, which is the piece that most people, I think, automatically think of when they think of knowledge management. I think the key difference here is that it's really more than just asking people what do they want to do over the next year. A lot of companies, I think, historically, as part of training and skills development, they typically just ask people, what do you want to get developed on as part of their personal development program, and there might be a conference or two, or maybe one or two classes. I think the more progressive companies that we're seeing, their approach to training and skills development is really taking a more holistic approach and doing a skills assessment, understanding where the gaps are in the organization relative to where they need to be, and then having a very specific training and development plan that includes both group training, where you have larger organizational gaps, as well as personal individual training to address the individual gaps. And then the fourth part of knowledge management, the fourth key element, is category knowledge. Again, most organizations, you may have someone that's been buying a category for 10, 15, 20 years, and you just rely on that person's knowledge around the categories, the stakeholders, the markets, market intelligence, the specifications. And again, with higher and higher levels of turnover, it's going to be more and more critical to find a way to document that, because you're not going to be able to rely on just someone's institutional knowledge. When you have people coming and going every 2 or 3 years, it's going to be very important to formally document your category knowledge, your category strategy, and we've got some examples of tools that we see companies using around that. So let's go into some of those elements. But one of the first key points before we get into the details, one of the mistakes that we see a lot of companies use with regard to knowledge management is just trying to capture everything too much, and it becomes information overload. You'll have literally a whole filing cabinet with information around one category. And when you have too much information, people just don't use it at all. So one of the, first lessons learned that we've seen around knowledge management is just be very selective around what you're capturing. There are certain things that are very important, like documenting your processes, having recent and valuable market intelligence, understanding what's relevant with regard to category information, specifications and cost drivers and things like that, and RFX templates and things like that. So there's certain things that are very important, and we'll go through those in a few minutes. But it's really important not to do too much, because if you do too much, no one's going to use it. So for those of you following along, we're on page 14 now. The first element I talked about was process knowledge. One of the things that we see a lot of companies doing very effectively with regard to documenting their processes is using process toolkits. And what this is really, it's just a way to document very specifically the different steps of your key processes. Again, whether it's strategic sourcing, and whether you have a 5-step or 7-step or 9-step process, making sure that you've got very effective documentation that clearly outlines, if someone came in new tomorrow, they could take this toolkit and, with a little practice, really understand exactly how you do this process, whether it's sourcing or supplier relationship management or category management or category strategy or spend assessment. And progressive companies that we see typically have 7 or 8 different toolkits around their key procurement processes. And the ones that are most effective that we find, especially if you're a global or a decentralized organization, is developing some type of web-based toolkit. And there are technologies out there that can enable this for you. We see a lot of companies using external technologies. We also see some companies just doing this through some type of intranet application. where basically it's kind of a drill down approach where, like if you see the slide on slide 14, you could click on some of the sub-steps, like under opportunity assessment and startup, you click on gather base data, and then that would give you the detailed steps for that part, that sub-process, as well as have linkages or the ability to download tools and templates. And again, this is very important to be able to, especially for global, and you want to deploy a standardized process to be able to use version control and make sure everyone has the latest and greatest, sample RFP or sample supplier rating matrix or category strategy template or whatever component of your process is. It's just a great way to standardize your processes. And again, with higher turnover expected with the Gen Y workforce, increasingly this is becoming almost just critical to have something like this. So that's one of the things that we're seeing with regard to the process knowledge management piece.
So, John, as you talk about this, what is, and obviously here you have a technology footprint, what part of the formal knowledge management program needs to be automated? What percentage? Is it 100%? I
think if you're in a large organization, technology plays a key component. I mean, parts of it are just face time with regard to training and development, and we'll talk about that in a few minutes. But certainly with regard to process standardization, using technology for that, we think is just the most efficient way. And there are a lot of advantages to using technology with regard to version control and making sure that everyone's using the latest version of the process, the latest templates, things like that. Obviously, the technology piece that we're going to talk about next is that's all about technology. And then training and development, a lot of companies are using web-based tools increasingly, and we think that's certainly a great application. We think there's certain types of training that are better done experientially in a classroom environment where people can share and talk about certain topics, but it's certainly a lot more efficient to use web-based training for certain topics. And then the last piece we'll talk about later with regard to some of the other training techniques we'll get into in a few minutes. But, yeah, technology plays a very important role with regard to knowledge management. So on slide 15, the technology footprint, again, 15 years ago, a lot of procurement organizations had maybe one technology that they used, maybe PO management. And if you look at today, this is kind of our view of the technology footprint specific to the procurement space. There's just all types of technologies that could be used in your organization. Not everyone is using all of these technologies, but if this is kind of the range, if you had a data cleansing technology and you had a spend analysis tool and a supplier management tool and an e-sourcing tool, catalog and requisition management, if you had all these tools, just think about someone new coming into your organization that, on top of learning about your company, learning about your categories and your spend, learning about your organization and the culture and your stakeholders, on top of that, they're expected to use all these different types of technologies that may be new to them. It's just, you've got to have some type of knowledge management program just around the technology. And there are a lot of, obviously, good training tools that are available from whoever you get your technology from. But, if you've got multiple technologies, it's important to find a way to organize that so that someone coming in can quickly get up to speed on the technologies. And a lot of these technologies are also used by your stakeholders, people outside of the procurement organization, increasingly more. So it's just important to have, as part of your overall knowledge management program, a specific element focused on how are we going to get our organization as well as stakeholders that are going to use this technology, how do we make sure that they can take full advantage of this and use it in the right way? So that's becoming increasingly a really big part of knowledge management. On slide 16, I talked about the third element of knowledge management was about skills and training and development. And again, our approach to this is really you need to take a holistic approach to that, not just the kind of the traditional way of asking people what they want to get trained on and for the next year, and then you just do that every year. And usually those types of programs aren't very effective. The ones that we see that are most effective are companies that are taking a more holistic approach where they do typically an annual skills assessment to understand very clearly where their organization's skills are relative to where they need to be, And from that skills assessment, you have a comprehensive kind of snapshot of where your gaps are, and again, where your needs are either individually. You may find that there are certain types of skills that just a handful of individuals have gaps in, and you can deal with those on an individual basis. And you typically will see more core gaps that the organization as a whole has, and those can be handled through either classroom or just in a larger group environment. But it really gives you the ability to understand very specifically where your gaps are on an annual basis, and to build those gaps and those development plans into each person's individual development plan, as well as at a management level. The head of the department will also have goals around getting the organization's skills up to a certain level. And, doing that on an annual basis, you do that over time, overall, ultimately you're going to build a much stronger organization. And again, with higher turnover expected, this is becoming more and more important. Slide 17 just shows an example that, out of a skills assessment, typically you'll have individual development plans, you'll have training needs around just core skills like financial analysis or business plan analysis or presentation skills, strategic planning, that kind of thing. And then you'll have process gaps, especially, again, with the higher turnover. You have people coming in that are new to your processes that may be different from the company that they were just at. You'll find gaps around specific processes, sourcing, supplier relationship management, category strategy, and things like that. And then on slide 18, there's some examples of specific types of training that we see a lot of organizations doing today. It's not just 2 or 3 classes around sourcing or supplier relationship management. There are a lot of detailed training that we see a lot of companies doing, like cost modeling and strategic alliance development and RFP development. So it's important to really peel the onion and get down to some of the core skills, not just at a cursory level, like we need sourcing training. And these are just some examples of some of the training that we've seen a lot of companies using.
So, John, as you talk about Generation Y coming into play, what are you looking for the ideal skill set of the future?
Well, we're seeing a lot of companies, I would say the more progressive companies are trying to get a blend. We see a lot of companies recruiting from more and more so from programs that are specific to supply chain management, whether it's Arizona State or Michigan State. There are a lot of great programs out there that are specific to procurement. So we see some companies that are specifically recruiting just at a core level, people with good, strong procurement backgrounds that also have strong financial analysis skills and things like that. Mm-hmm. We see companies looking for category-specific skills, so it's becoming more and more common, like if you're finding someone to head up the marketing category, getting people with marketing backgrounds that actually come from a marketing organization, or getting people with a legal background if they're heading up the legal category. And then we're also seeing companies just getting out of the box and getting people with more creative backgrounds, more of a arts and kind of liberal arts type backgrounds, to just kind of add a different, just a different kind of creativity and different background to the organization. So a lot of companies are specifically trying not to hire everyone, alike. They're trying to get some varied experiences.
So what do you think about all the programs now where people can come out with degrees in sourcing and supply chain management? Is that a place that a lot of these folks are coming from, and is it because they're teaching a lot of these skills for this newer generation? Yeah,
definitely. I mean, we're seeing, obviously, 10 years ago it was pretty rare a lot of these programs were in their early stages, and not a lot of people had that background, but it's becoming more and more prevalent. I think as procurement's becoming more and more strategic, and companies are being a lot more proactive and looking for the right skill sets. So yeah, we're seeing that more and more.
So tell me this then, do you see the use of social media, Facebook, LinkedIn groups, do you see that functionality playing a role in category knowledge?
I do a lot. One of the presentations we talked about is just organizational trends, and the Innovation Summit that we did last year, one of the discussions was that the procurement organizations becoming more and more virtual. You get organizations that or a lot of companies are using offshore resources. They're using telecommuting, it's becoming more and more prevalent. And so when you have an organization where you've got people all around the world, the thing that's tough is how do you create a culture when people are not all in the same office? Mm-hmm. And one of our predictions is that there will be something like Facebook, social media tools, and there are already a few, but I think they're in their infancy. But companies are using more and more, will be using more and more social media to create a culture in a virtual environment. Because it's important, it's not all about the work, right? I mean, you've got to learn people and know what their interests are and be able to just create a culture like you would do in an office environment. When you've got literally, it's not uncommon at all to have the person that's the category lead for facilities who's based in China, that's responsible for facilities worldwide for a company, so they've got teammates on their team that are all over the world. It's not all about just the work, it's creating that culture. And we think social media will play an important part of that in the future.
Now, are you seeing a lot of use of Yammer out there?
That is one of the kind of upcoming tools that we've heard about. A lot of companies are starting to use that. We think there's a lot more development that'll occur in the next 1 to 2 years around that. But yeah, that's a fairly common tool we're seeing. And then,
so another question that came in said, should a company attempt to hang on to Gen Y employees or plan for a 2 to 3 year turnover cycle? And if so, why don't you talk about where you'd like to see these people go when they do turnover?
We talked about that in our last Innovation Summit, that a lot of companies are trying to fight this expected 2 to 3 year turnover. And one of the, I thought a great comment was, maybe we're better off getting, instead of just trying to find, someone that wants to stay with us a lifetime, and maybe their talent's just kind of mediocre, maybe we're better off getting the best and brightest, even if they're only going to stay with us 2 or 3 years, because they just, they want to see different industries, or maybe they want to experience other functions outside of procurement or whatever. I think the more progressive approach is just to accept that. Obviously, you want to make your organization the place that people want to work, and you're going to get some people that are going to stay longer than 2 or 3 years, but you're going to get some really bright people that's what they want to do. They want to try new things, and if you can create an environment where 2 or 3 year tenure will work, you're probably going to be better off. And and that's why we think knowledge management's so critical. Because if you have standardized processes and they're available through your intranet or through web-based tools, and you have the right training and you have the right technology tools, and if you have that, then someone coming in just for 2 or 3 years can function and be on the ground, up and running, in a very short time frame, and will actually work well. So.
Good. Okay. Thanks.
So with that, we're going to move on to our second and last polling question. How do you organize for knowledge management? One of the questions we get a lot is, what does knowledge management look like? It's this kind of concept, and we've tried to define it through these 4 elements. But how do you actually organize for that? And so the answers that we've got as part of the polling question are, no one is responsible, which, if you don't have a knowledge management program, obviously no one's responsible. We have some companies, where responsibility is assigned throughout the organization. So it's kind of ad hoc. Different people, one person may be responsible for sourcing training, one person may be responsible for technology training, and maybe there are some gaps, but you got various responsibilities assigned throughout as part of their other, just as one piece of their normal day-to-day job. And then C is really a combination of some dedicated resources and then some that are just assigned as part of their everyday role. And then D is we have a formal organization through a centralized center of excellence model.
Good. So all right, so we'll go ahead and just keep that open for a minute, folks, and go ahead and click and submit. And then, John, let me take you back to a couple other questions that came in. Can you talk about what are the new recruiting strategies? How are people recruiting these days?
Well, certainly, online recruiting. We're seeing more and more recruiting through, LinkedIn or some of the business-focused social media tools. That's becoming more and more common. Another thing that I think has been talked about in some other webinars is just how you reach out to potential candidates. A lot of companies are having to kind of sell their organization, and they're doing that through social media, through Facebook pages or through LinkedIn pages. to create a buzz about their organization so that they actually have people coming to them. You know, the danger is if you're not a very desirable organization, that's going to get out there too, and people are going to talk about it on these social media blogs. But I think the progressive organizations that have created a great place to work are trying to get that message out there through various types of social media tools, and that's part of their recruiting strategy as well.
John, I'd also add, I think really having organizations think through what their value proposition and spending time, like you said, on the brand of their organization helps differentiate why would people want to come to work for your company versus somebody else's company. And I'd also add that the criteria that companies are using now for selecting procurement talent has changed a bit, and kind of building in that creativity and those relationship building skills. So there's now, we're seeing companies using multi-dimensional interviews that focus on those new skill sets, using face-to-face interviews, case studies, testing, really doing more with references and background checks, and working with top supply chain programs. So there's a lot of some old things that we've been doing, but a lot of new things that we're doing a bit differently.
Yeah, it's interesting. In fact, we were talking to some people that recruit, and probably you know this as well, Don, that they were telling us that Generation Y is more likely to show up for a job interview if you text them the time and place rather than email them the time and place.
True.
And that just seems crazy to me.
Changing world.
Yeah, it's changing so fast, and I guess we're not Generation X or Y, are we?
Unfortunately.
Yeah. So, John, the poll results are up if you want to comment to that.
Sure, yeah. So we had kind of a split between B and C, so a combination of ad hoc, actually more than I expected on A, as no one's responsible, 21%, but it seemed like the bulk was either as kind of ad hoc assigned throughout the organization as part of people's everyday role, combined with their other roles, as well as just some dedicated resources, and that's what we see as most common. A lot of organizations may have someone that's responsible for, say, training, and they're dedicated to that, but then a lot of the other elements that we talked about are just kind of assigned as part of other people's everyday role. We see 9% that actually have a formal structure, and we think, a year from now, I think if we did this webinar again, or this topic, that would be up a lot, because we're seeing a lot of companies talk about knowledge management, and they're starting to put in place more formal centers of excellence to address this. We'll talk about an example of that in just a couple of slides.
Okay, good. Thank you.
So why don't we move on to the next part? The last element, the fourth element that we talked about with regard to knowledge management, is really about category knowledge management. And again, traditionally, in a traditional procurement organization, you'll have someone, your more strategic categories, you've got someone that's been with the company for 25 plus years, and they're kind of like, they are the knowledge management piece of your organization with regard to category knowledge. And again, with that model is shifting, and most companies aren't going to have that luxury. So we see a lot of companies are starting to really try to formalize their category knowledge and document it more explicitly than just have it be in someone's mind. And so one of the more creative examples we've seen, one of our clients is using category playbooks. So for every category, they have these documents that document everything from, what is this category, what's in scope, what's not in scope, how mature is it. They've got a very well-documented category strategy that they update on an annual basis, sometimes even more often than annually. They've got PO instructions, for any purchase over $500,000, this is the approach. Any purchase over less than $500,000, this is the approach you use. Who are the vendors, who are the approved vendors, and then having specific templates. So if you've got a staff augmentation category, having those sample RFPs, sample scope of work documents in that category playbook. And these are typically done electronically, so they're either web-based or they're as part of your file server, so that if someone left tomorrow that was responsible for, say, facility services, someone new coming in would have everything at their fingertips they would need to know about the category strategy and all the different elements. So we find this to be a very, very effective tool, something like this. And then on page 21, another part of the category strategy, most of the things that I just talked about are really kind of the internal look at category strategy. What do we spend our money on and all that. But there's the external piece as well. And again, in a traditional environment, you've got someone who's worked with the category for 20 years. They know the market. They know who the suppliers are. They just through their institutional knowledge, they know a lot about the market. And again, with higher turnover, companies are going to have that luxury. So we're seeing more and more companies either use, this is an example. Obviously, we sell market intelligence, but whether this is something that you do internally, whether you use an external provider or a combination, we're seeing more and more companies document more formally their market intelligence. So that's the external piece of category knowledge that's a key component of a knowledge management program. And then finally on page 22, we talk about just how are companies organizing around this, how specifically are companies creating a knowledge management program. And kind of the most common way that we see that happening is through a center of excellence. Some companies will do this through 2 or 3 different centers of excellence. Some will have just one. But basically, it's like having an internal consulting/training group that is the keeper of the process. So any procurement-related process, this group would be responsible for documenting that, creating the toolkits that we talked about earlier, making sure that they're available, and the latest version is available to everyone that needs that, whether it's through web-based tools or through a more traditional, electronic documents. That group is also continually benchmarking, looking at best practices, updating the processes and the templates on a very regular basis. You may have dashboards that are created by this group, performance dashboards, things like that. So that's kind of how we see that being handled through some type of formal center of excellence. Sometimes we'll see companies that have maybe a training and development center of excellence. It's more of an HR type role, and then they have the processes and technology handled by a different center of excellence. But this is probably the most common way that we see that happening. And a lot of the documentation has to be. The center of excellence isn't necessarily a large organization. Like the category playbooks are typically created by the category managers, but the center of excellence creates the templates and the tools to be able to do that. And they may be kind of the reminder to the category management team that, hey, we haven't updated this, in 12 months or 13 months, and making sure that those are kept up to date and they're well documented and that they're available to whoever needs them.
So, John, why you said some people might have multiple COEs in different regions of the world. Why would you have multiple COEs? Wouldn't you always want to have one, so it's always center-led and always having and being the same across the world, around the world?
For very large procurement organizations, some may just break it out based on. I mentioned that there was the 4 elements of knowledge management.
Mm-hmm.
So some might just because of the size or for whatever reason. Break that out. So as I mentioned, they may have one center of excellence that's really more of an HR role that's around training and development, and another one that's more around the process side. Some may even have another group, whether it's called a center of excellence or not, that's formally responsible for the technology and making sure everyone's up to speed on the technology.
Mm-hmm.
So it just depends on how global they are and the size of the organization, I think.
So then where would you put supplier diversity, green sourcing, corporate social responsibility? Would that be in the COE?
We most often see diversity as a separate organization because there are a lot of specific tasks around reporting and supplier development, programs that really aren't part of a traditional center of excellence.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of companies will split that out separately, supplier diversity. But some of those elements could, like the sustainability and green sourcing, sometimes that's more commonly part of a center of excellence. You may have one person that's assigned specifically to sustainability and green sourcing types initiatives, but they may be located in a center of excellence.
Okay, very good.
So that's all that I had today. I want to thank everyone for joining us, and if you have any questions or about this, feel free to reach out to Don or I directly or through Sourcing Interest Group.
Okay, so can I speak on your behalf? Is it all right for the questions that came in today, if we didn't get to your question or if we passed by it somehow, we'll make sure that John and Don have an opportunity to respond to you. But then also, on behalf of John and Don, any other questions or anything else or any other comments that come up, please reach out directly, or you can call us and we'll put you in contact with them. But you've got the contact information here, and we can, once again, you should have a PDF version of the slides already on your desktop or in your inbox, and we'll push the slides to you one more time. We're having an issue with the file transfer system right now, so if you don't already have a copy, send us a quick email. We'll send you another PDF version of the slides, and check your spam. Make sure it didn't end up in your junk mail. So I think these guys are going to give you back 10 minutes on your time, on your agenda. So John and Don, I want to thank you as always. I always enjoy a Denali USA presentation, Denali Group presentation. You guys did a great job. And I think you're going to be at some of our upcoming regional meetings, are you not?
Yeah, we've got a couple of our partners that will be at the Silicon Valley regional meeting, and I think the New York regional meeting as well.
Okay, so May 13th and May 24th, New York City and Silicon Valley. You've got both sides of the United States covered right there. So, folks, some of the partners will be there. Make sure that you reach out and carry on the conversations when you see them in person. And with that, I'm going to thank everybody. Remember to go ahead and register for next week's webinar, and make sure you register for the Fall Summit. The hotel will fill up, and we want to make sure that we can get you all there, and I'm sure Denali Group will be presenting at that as well. So with that, John and Don, thank you. You guys have a great day, and thank you for sharing with us today.
Thank you, Don. Appreciate the time.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye.